and welcome to the Moviescramble podcast. In this episode, we are continuing our Universal Monsters box set, and if you can allow me to be frank, you're in for another treat. Yes, this time we are comparing James Whale's 1931 Birth of a Movie Monster, Frankenstein, with the 2024 coming-of-age comedy Lisa Frankenstein. We also have a fantastic podcast on the Guillermo del Toro interpretation of Frankenstein within our podcasting archives, and we'd love it if you gave that a listen too. But of course, in order to chat all things monster, I'll need a bit of company. And I've heard that his wife shouts, "It's alive! It's alive!" when he finally makes it out of bed on a Sunday morning. It is John. John, how are you?
You must have listening devices in my house, because that's kind of what happens. Oh man, yes. It is trying to wake the undead sometimes, getting me out of my bed when I don't actually have to. So yes, it's very, very true, unfortunately. It's a bit too close to home for my liking. Spoils the illusion of me being a man about town at 7 o'clock in the morning. But yes, yeah, I'm very well. How are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, really good. Super excited for this next installment of our Universal Monsters. I think this has been one of my favourite ideas that we've done so far. So yeah, really looking forward to it. So to the films, if we kick off with the 1931 version of Frankenstein, this was directed by James Whale, and there are no fewer than 8 writing credits attributed to this film. Bela Lugosi was once considered for the role of the creature, but of course that would eventually go to Boris Karloff, who was something of a late bloomer by Hollywood standards, as he was 44 by the time the film premiered. It gives us the iconic monster look, flat top head, bolts in the neck, scars across the skin and sunken in face, courtesy of Jack Pierce's makeup design. Karloff also famously took out his dental bridge and wore shoes weighing 13 pounds each in order to fully realise the look of the character. The cast includes the likes of Colin Clive, May Clark, John Bowles, Edward Van Sloan, Frederick Kerr, and again the phenomenal Dwight Fry. So, John, given that the big sort of title piece of this film is the creature himself, he appears around about 31 minutes into the film, which is quite late given that the film is only an hour and 10 minutes long. How did Boris Karloff's performance shape our sort of understanding of the creature, especially given that he has no dialogue?
It's a very, very good interpretation of a character that wasn't really described in the way that they actually brought it to screen. It's very, very different. If you look back in the original text, the monster or the creature is described as being beautiful, as a very good looking man. It's not this horrendous thing that you actually see on screen. Karloff obviously had a lot to do with the way that the look of the creature, because like you say, he had stuff done with his face, he had bridge work taken out and everything, but he was fully involved. Like he had like lots of additional makeup put on his eyes to make them look heavy and make the character look more menacing than he actually is. And I think he regretted that because he could hardly open his eyes with the amount of stuff that was actually in it, which all adds to the interpretation. The fact that he's not there for 30 minutes, I think kind of works, because you don't need to see him right off. There's a certain amount of suspense, a certain amount of build-up to it that you're going to have a reveal. Now, you get occasional shots of him lying on the table, but he's all covered up, especially his face is completely covered up. But you can see that like it's a massive person there. And you're just getting sort of wee glimpses of what he could be like. And I would imagine for audiences seeing that for the first time, would be quite frightening. And the way that he was actually introduced in person was really interesting as well, because he backed into the scene. His back was to the camera, which is a really unusual way. Nobody backs into a room, but he backs into a room and turns around, so you get the full the look and all that, and you just think, my goodness, that's something else, because it does not look anywhere near human at all. It just doesn't look like that, and it must have been quite a sort of moment with a lot of people when they saw it for the first time. Not so much for us now, because it's been part of the culture for as long as I can remember. Obviously, when they talk about monsters and things, then that's one of the looks that they have. So it's not the shock value isn't there anymore because we're so familiar with it. Even if I would imagine there'd be quite a lot of people out there who's not seen the original Frankenstein film, but could recognize the creature right away and say, "Yep, that's the creature." And for a long time, they would say that's Frankenstein because it used to be called Frankenstein as well, which is obviously not correct, but who cares? It's just the way it is with these things as well. What about yourself? What did you think?
I just think that first, because you get that sort of like close up and triplet that happens where it really sinks into, and his eyes are really sunken back in his head. But what always strikes me about this film, and obviously the sequel, which I'm sure we'll go on to talk about on another podcast, is how vulnerable the character is. Like, he spends a lot of times with his palms out, like palms up, like his hands outstretched towards his creator in a sort of like grasping gesture, or maybe even in prayer, if you want to interpret it that way. And because he can't communicate, a lot of what he does is like sort of grunts or sounds, but you can tell when he's in distress, because actually like the vocal technique that Karloff employs means that we can tell when he's angry and when he's in distress. And so I think that for me, what always struck me is the creature is supposed to be this great monstrous beast who, ravages women and rampages across towns. But I'm always shocked by how vulnerable he comes across. And I think that's something that is missed quite often in the interpretations of the creature, is just how sad and how vulnerable and how lonely he is as well. And I think that given this is like 1931 and a lot of the acting is like big theatrical stage acting, because a lot of the sets are designed that way and a lot of the performances are written that way, I'm always surprised by how nuanced and how small sometimes his performance seems. Like he's really grasped the sort of innermost part of that creature. And I think that's quite remarkable for the time.
Yeah, it's with the advent of more interesting film techniques and the way that things are shot there. Before, you would have everything sort of in mid shots because it mirrored because a lot of stuff came from stage productions. So they would just basically, not in a lazy way, but it was the easy way. They were doing things quickly. So therefore they would do it and they'd say, right, this is what we're going to do. But this takes full advantage of the fact that the camera can get right close in to a character. And they did a very similar thing with Dracula as well. Obviously, they highlighted Dracula's face an awful lot and then highlighted his eyes within his face in the same way that they're highlighting the creature. And it's the sort of the micro that they're looking at here. They're not looking at the sort of the big expressions. It's all the wee minor ones. It's this sort of very, very on the surface, and you wouldn't notice that from a distance, but you would notice it when you're right in close up. And it's the terror in his eyes. Like I say, this character is not the monster that everybody makes out to be and has been parodied and done in that way since then. And it is, in a way, they've actually made the main sort of characters in these type of films more sort of black and white, good and bad all the time. And the case with this film is that's not what's actually happening on screen. This characterization of the creature is something that is afraid pretty much all of the time and very childlike, even though it's got this 7.5 foot body and it's got the brain, the AB normal brain.
Normal, yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting way to actually look back on the character, I think, because we don't expect that from what we've learned from then on. But yeah, it is very, very sympathetic to basically all of the characters in film, but primarily to the creature itself. It doesn't make it this horrible creature, this horrible monster to begin with. Obviously it does bad things, but you could say that's down to nature and nurture more than anything else.
A sort of fear or a lack of understanding about how the world works, because he's not really been given that education by Henry Frankenstein, as he's known in this particular adaptation. No idea why the name was changed, but obviously he's played by Colin Clive. His "It's Alive" line is like one of the most iconic in cinema history. What do you think of his performance beyond that single line?
It was very good. He came across as being a person rather than a caricature of a mad scientist. He was given enough screen time so that he could do the whole unhinged mad scientist bit at the start, and everybody keep away from me. My work is very important. You can't see this, all this kind of stuff. But then there was a bit in the middle of the film where he was completely humanized because he was back in society. He was getting married, and it was just, and it showed like different sides of the person, how obsession can take over a normal person. And he is a normal person as well, but once he was brought back into the fold to a certain extent, then he was regarded as being a pillar of the community and everything again. And that kind of showed at the end where they were setting up hunting parties and they had him leading one of them because he's this pillar of the community. He's the son of the Baron, if you like. So yeah, I felt it was quite nuanced as well, and it fitted in the same way as the creature itself. The creature is not just a black and white, it's just not bad or good, whereas he is not bad or good. Yes, he has certain ideas about him that are a bit questionable, obviously, about bringing things back from the dead and being a godlike figure, if you like. But yeah, I thought it was a very sort of sympathetic portrayal. He didn't go into full sort of caricature mad scientist role at any time. Mind you, he did beat the shit out of Fritz every occasion
that he could
possibly get.
Yeah.
He wasn't doing anything, and we give him a kick anyway, just for the sake of it. It was like, come on. But yes, I think that was all part of the sort of the yin and yang of his type of character as well, really.
Yeah, I think you get the impression that his obsession is almost driven by this desire to not be who he's been set up to be in life. Like, obviously it's expected that, he becomes the Baron, he takes a wife, he produces a son, and that dynasty sort of lives on, but it's almost like he's rejecting all the trappings of that to go and pursue his own desires. And obviously we have the famous line that follows up It's Alive, which is, "Now I know what it feels like to be God," which was initially cut from the film because that was obviously deemed to be blasphemous, but they've since restored it and put it back in. And I think that gives a little insight, as you say, as to how obsession can tip a person beyond sort of any rational behaviour. Because of course when we first meet him, it's himself and Fritz, they're peeping on a funeral, they dig up a grave, he says something about waiting for a new life to come, and Colin Clive sort of almost looks into the camera, not quite, but almost making eye contact with the audience, sort of setting you up for kind of this relationship where you get an insight into who he is as a person. They obviously cut down a man who's been hanged as well. So when you first meet him, you're thinking, Jesus, this guy seems a bit sketchy. What is he doing? This doesn't seem like normal behaviour. But then, as you see, he's kind of plunged back into society. And then we have Mae Clark's portrayal of Elizabeth, his fiancée. I felt like she was definitely given a lot more to do than the female character parts in Dracula. Like, she actually drives a little bit of the narrative here. She also does have one of the most iconic wedding dresses in cinema history as well. So, but what did you think of her contribution to the film? Because it feels like a more built-up role for a woman, I think.
Definitely, yeah. It was not so much a case of a two-hander with this film. There was she was a leading lady in this film. And it was interesting that when they were casting it, she was the one that they wanted to go with, because over Betty Davis, I think, was being considered for the role. But she wasn't considered to have the same sort of screen persona that they were looking for in this role. They were looking for a particular type of persona. And it was this female character who was a strong female character. She wasn't just there to scream and be sort of to faint and be carried, exit stage left, by maids and servants kind of idea, which you kind of got with a lot of these films, especially, the Dracula film was a wee bit like that.
Yeah.
Very much a diminished character. But yeah, it was quite surprising that, well, it shouldn't be, because obviously the source obviously came from a female. Anyway, so
although annoyingly, she is credited as Mrs. Percy B. Shelley, based on a novel that is so antiquated.
Yeah, and there's that, and it's also based on the play that came after it. The same way that Dracula was mainly based on the play, and you can see the play's origins and the way it was all staged. But yes, I felt she was a very good performer in this, and she had quite a lot to work with which is always good for any actor if they've got a cinema. If they've not got much of a, background in the character or anything, or the character isn't particularly well developed, then they really struggle, and it's no fault of the actor themselves. But in this case, yeah, she had a lot to work with, and she basically took full advantage of it. I thought she was excellent in this movie.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think she's given so much more to do than other female characters, perhaps, of the era, not just the genre, but just the era of filmmaking. So it was really interesting to see a character who, she could quite easily, like, I don't want to say control, but she could drive Henry. Like, she could definitely push him into decisions as well. She wasn't just there to simply be a bride.
And
she
Victor.
wasn't.
Obviously, she was
as well.
fully in control of him as well, because he was like a dog in heat around
her.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So it was interesting to see her position. The rest of the cast obviously includes, as I've mentioned, the likes of Dwight Fry, who again is excellent in this. He's slightly more two-dimensional, I would argue, than he is in Dracula, because he's playing this sort of like humpbacked, crazy-eyed lab assistant in this. But I still think he's brilliant. The one character I have an issue with in this film is Baron Frankenstein himself. I think he's meant to be comic relief, but he is painfully unfunny. What did you think of the supporting cast?
Well, in terms of the Baron, yes, that was this typical doddery old man. It's like he reminded me of the character of Watson in the Sherlock Holmes films, the Basil Rathbone ones. It was the same sort of doddery old character, except he doesn't have a redeeming quality in that he's got this sort of medical scientific background. He just seemed to be this old fool of a guy who just didn't really know what he was doing. You could easily have cut that whole part out, and it would not have affected the film in any way. It would have meant nothing. He could just be mentioned in passing that his father was unhappy with his choices and everything. He didn't need to be involved in it. He didn't need to go up to the tower with Elizabeth and things. So it seemed a bit of a waste. But yeah, I think you're right, because there's a wee comic bit at the end where they're drinking the great grandmother's wine or something. Yeah. So and that's like sort of the very end of it, and you're thinking, didn't make any sense why that would be there. I just didn't quite get it. Yeah, with the Dwight role, it was a toned down version of what he'd previously done, and it was a very physical role again.
Yeah,
he obviously seemed to specialize in these type of roles. He was all over the place. He was always doing stuff. He was always like getting in the way, and basically, like I said before, getting hit all the time as well. And again, there was a slight sort of comedic element to that, but not
which obviously has been parodied since. Like you get the Igor character in like Young Frankenstein, that sort of thing. Yeah,
it was very interesting. I mean, obviously it was called Fritz, which is supposed to mean that they're somewhere in Germany, yet nobody else in the sort of main cast speaks with a German accent, and it's kind of all over the place. But that's neither here nor there. That's probably down to, I think you mentioned it before when we talked the Dracula ones, it's more of a sort of fairy tale, so it doesn't really matter whether the accents work. But yeah, I thought he was excellent. His performance was really, really good. But apart from that, I mean, you're not talking about very many other characters in the background. It was very sort of a tight main cast. Obviously, it was a cast of thousands with the villagers and all this sort of stuff.
Loads of extras.
Yeah, the main cast was quite tight, which I think, again, goes back to its stage roots rather than anything else. They just obviously didn't need to expand on it. It didn't need to bring in any extra characters. There was obviously the inclusion of the professor, Frankenstein's mentor and professor as well, which, again, we've got a wee link back to Dracula there as well.
Yeah.
It's the same actor who played it. And this one was more toned down. This was more of a very straight role here. He wasn't offering exposition in the same way that it was being offered within the Dracula film. So it was very much a sort of secondary character. And am I right in saying he was the one that turns up at the very start of the film, comes out from the curtain?
I was just about to ask you about that as well, because obviously we talked about Dracula was meant to have an introduction and it didn't, whereas this film does. Now, it opens with what's called a friendly warning directed to the audience, and it says, this film might even horrify you. Well, we've warned you. What did you think that added to like your, like, how does it set you up for watching this film?
Well, it increases your anticipation of it for a start, doesn't it? And like I say, at the time, people wouldn't have seen anything like this. So if the film had been, say the film had been out for a week or so and the buzz was, oh, this is real, quite a big horror film and everything, and there's a lot going on, you're going to be terrified, then it's only increased by the guy coming out that starts saying, well, we warned you,
Yeah.
And it's something that it's very good sort of publicity wise, and it's something that Hitchcock took and ran with basically for the whole of his career. He would do these sort of things. He was using trailers more than that kind of cinematic device right at the start of the film, but it's in the same vein. It's just heightening up the audience just a wee bit more, saying, well, you're in for something special here, just, sit back. But see if you get scared and you end up wetting yourself, it's nothing to do with us. We warned you, we told you. Notice I said wet myself rather than anything. It could have been a lot worse. Yeah.
The thing is, though, like, I do imagine, like, back in 1931, like, particularly that, as we've talked about, that first close-up of the creature, just how terrifying that would have been to audiences that had never seen something like that before. And obviously part of that is the Jack Pierce makeup design, which, is, you've rightly said, Karloff had lots to do with as well. What aspects of that creature design then still feel effective today? Because obviously when you look at the likes of Guillermo del Toro, he went a completely different path altogether with how he structured his creature. Do you think it's become too much of a parody for it still to sort of have that horror element to it? Or are you still like, no, this is the peak of the monster or the creature?
Well, you have to take into consideration that it was nearly 100 years ago and it has been interpreted in many ways since then. But if you look at it at the time, what is there to compare it against, really, for mass audiences? People would have seen like makeup design throughout the silent era because there was an awful lot of that going on. I mean, you've only got to look at the likes of like Nosferatu, for instance. That is a triumph in terms of makeup and the way that brings a sort of horror character to life. People would not have seen anything like this, and it's the way that the whole of the head has been constructed, not so much the body. The body is just massive. It's just a brute. Fair enough. And it was wearing these massive big shoes, which are, they're maybe about one size short of clown shoes, these things. But they're still realistic. And like I say, they're really weighty and everything, which affected the way that he walked and everything. And that's all part of the character as well. But it's all in the head. It's all in the face. It's the fact that he's got these two metal bolts or conductors sticking out the side of his neck. And the fact that, like, on his forehead, there is hair, but there's also staples as well. And it's something that it's just so abnormal, but it's still recognizable as a human being. And it just yeah, exactly. There's very little to it, but it's the way that was all kind of carefully constructed, and the thought and the attention to detail in it. Like when they put the character together, they used green makeup because it would look more grey in the black and white. And it's all that attention to detail that makes it just it makes it iconic, really, doesn't it? And I think in a way it hasn't been bettered because everything else is just a variation in a theme from there. And it takes the likes of Guillermo del Toro to do something radically different. He did it in such a way that it was more stitched together all over the body, especially the face. You could see all the scars and the lines and everything. This version had some, you saw it in the arms and everything, but you didn't really see it anywhere else. There was maybe like a couple of scars behind the neck, and obviously the head itself was covered by hair, so you wouldn't see the scars there where the brain had been inserted and everything else was covered. He was wearing a suit, so you didn't see a lot of the body scars from the parts of the body that were actually put together. So yeah, I thought it was very clever the way they did it, and obviously they spent an awful lot of time doing it as well. Apparently Karloff and Pierce spent weeks and weeks just talking through everything. They would meet every night and they would talk through how this was all going to go together. Now that's not diminishing the role of Pierce in this. He was obviously the head, but he was quite willing to collaborate on this and actually take advice on it as well, rather than saying, no, this is what we do and that's what we do. So they worked together, and I think the reason they worked together was it helped with the characterization as well. It helped Karloff actually develop what the character was going to be like, because he was obviously within this enclosure, and it's like, how do you act within this enclosure? And it worked well because, like you said at the start, he doesn't talk, he grunts, he makes noises. And as we know, 70% of communication is non-verbal. So he can get away with not actually being able to speak and everything. The tone and the range of the grunts and the yelps, and towards the end, screams even, because you hear this high-pitched scream right at the end when he's in the windmill. So there's like a variety of things that he was able to pull into that particular character. And I think it all starts off with, you know, the way that it looks. Same way that John Travolta used to start his characters, by the way they walked. He obviously started his character by the way that it actually looked, and he would take it from there. So yeah, it's very, very good. And has it been bettered? I don't think so.
Not for something that I think is going to have the longevity that this particular look has. You know, it is the sort of ultimate in movie monsters, and I think that's the thing as well. Like, this makeup wasn't just about creating the character, it was also about creating something horrific, because it is a horror film, and I think they've sort of nailed that balance of something that does look like it's been stitched together by human hand, but something that's designed to scare as well. And as you say, the sort of like the staples, the sunken eyes, the obviously, like as I say, he's taking his bridge work out as well, that all contributes to the horror elements of it as well. And I think when you've achieved that status of being like the benchmark, even if it is through parody, like, you know, you've done something you know, really, really well. And I think that's obviously what's happened here. The film, obviously, as I've said, is barely over an hour long. It's like an hour, 10 minutes, whatever. How did you find the pacing in terms of affecting the emotional impact? How does the film structure sort of get you to that point where you're maybe feeling sorry for the creature by the end of it?
I couldn't really see this film being much longer than it is and still having the same impact, because you would be having to introduce subplots and other elements, maybe more to do with the Baron, for instance, because the tendency would be to be filling sort of more comedic elements, maybe have a little more to do with the townspeople. Now, I think we spend quite a lot of time with the townspeople, as when they're sort of brandishing their torches and going on. That goes on a wee bit too long for me, in my opinion. They could probably have cut a couple of minutes out of that and not have affected the film, but it kind of rolls along very quickly and you're swept up in it emotionally. So I think it's probably the right length in terms of that. It didn't need any more development. You were able to, you had some sort of empathetic connection with the creature quite early on, because you see him not being a monster. Like the first sort of interactions, he's been asked to stand up and sit down and just, you know, very sort of basic things. And he can do those, but at the same time, like he's holding his hands out because he wants somebody to touch him. He wants some sort of human connection. So immediately you're on the side of the creature here. And that only changes slightly when, like, he meets the little girl and things like that. But you can understand why that's.
Oh, you just wanted to see if she would float. Get over
it. Yeah, come on, for goodness sake. So, I know. We really shouldn't make light of child death.
No, I know, we really shouldn't.
But yes, I didn't see how it could be any longer than it could. No. I would obviously enjoyed seeing more of the creature and things like that, but I think it may have just been stretching your sort of empathy towards them in the end if it was longer.
Yeah, because I feel like there's still a big build up to the actual creation scene. Like, we don't lose anything for its short runtime. Like, that is like sort of the kind of main sort of standpoint in the film, in the sense that you're looking forward to seeing this creature come to life. You want to see if the experiment works, and I feel like that's given all of the time that it needs. I actually think that structurally and timing and pacing wise, you know, this film works perfectly at its 70-minute runtime. One of the things that I thought was quite interesting in comparison to the Guillermo del Toro Frankenstein, let's say, is and we've touched on it kind of lightly, the portrayal of Dr. Frankenstein himself. Is he the sort of tragic figure? Is he the villain, or something in between? Because I feel like Del Toro went out and out to say that he was a villain, whereas I feel like this one's a little bit more sympathetic. Now, given this was like the 1930s at the time, like, it's still I feel offering commentary on sort of like scientific ambition and the ethics of creation. How far did you feel that go? Obviously, within the context of the time period that the film was made. Never mind when the film was set.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the time, there was an awful lot of scientific advances going on at the time, but there were. I mean, if you think about it, like during that sort of time, you were talking about sort of the early days of plastic surgery and skin grafts and things like that from soldiers from the First World War. And you see photographs of people with the skin in their arm being connected to their face and all this in that sort of way, because it was very early. But there was elements around the actual advances at the time. Were they meddling with things that they shouldn't be? Because it's like taking the place of God in a way, and that's highlighted actually in the film. I know what it feels like to be a god. So yes, it would have been touching on these elements of, yes, we can do them, but really, should we be doing the same? Just jumping back to Jurassic Park here, So, yeah. Just because we can, should we be doing it? And there's a whole thing about extension of life as well, and that was a lot of medical advances at the time. They were starting to work on some of these major diseases that were wiping out so many people at the time, and it was through to sanitary practices, it was through to medical ingenuity at the time, and the way that we approach certain things about dealing with water and sanitation within the streets and all that sort of nice basic stuff, but all counts towards extending people's lives. Now, this is the extension. This is like sort of the furthest extension of that. What if you could extend a person's life past the point where they die? And obviously, when, according to like lots of religions, when you die, you transcend into another form. You go heaven, hell, all this kind of good stuff. Or if you're talking about the more sort of Eastern religions, then you transform into another being. You progress to the next stage, the next level kind of idea. So by doing this, by bringing someone back, how are you affecting them? Does it mean that they have no soul? Is it they're just a husk, they're a body and a brain? Or is the soul still there? Does the soul get retrieved and everything? Now, they don't really touch on a lot of that stuff. There's not an awful lot of religion. In fact, I don't know if there's any religion in Frankenstein, compared to obviously Dracula. You've got the crosses and all this kind of thing. But you don't have that here. And you don't have that debate. Well, it would be difficult to have that kind of debate within a 70-minute film. It's very much a, monster bad. We must deal with it. Deal with it with however means necessary. I'm not going to give the ending away of the film here, but yes, there would have been a whole debate around this at the time, because there would have been science being talked about in that way, about how do we extend a person's life, how do we bring them back. Transplant. This is sort of like going. This is ahead of like heart transplants and liver transplants and all this kind of things, which were starting to be developed, but obviously not successfully. So it is kind of taking elements of real life and running with it to the extreme, which a good horror and sort of science fiction based film does. And I think it does it very well. So it would have hit something sort of within the public conscious, as well as the fact that it was just a film. And it obviously goes back to Victorian times as well, when book actually came out. So you would have that. And it's obviously been slightly modernised in that way. But it was still very relevant because of the rate of progress that we went through as a species. There was an awful lot of change over that time. It's only in the last maybe like 10, 20 years we've kind of slowed down to a certain aspect. We're kind of repeating ourselves. You're getting more, you're buying a new phone and all this sort of stuff. There's not been the same number of breakthroughs, because it's sort of higher level breakthroughs that we're going for now, rather than, steam, electricity, cars, all this sort of stuff. They seem to be every other week with something brand new, but now that's not the case. And I sound like as if I'm an old man shouting at clouds.
Not at all. I honestly think you've hit the nail on the head. Like, see what you said there about like the notion of like the soul, and obviously they talk about like the normal brain and the criminal brain in this as well.
Yeah.
But I think the creature's innocence and his vulnerability sort of complicates this notion of the monstrosity, i.e. that you can just be a bad person because of what you're made up of, because he does show elements of being like very, very human. So I think you've hit the nail on the head completely. Like, and whilst it's not explicit in the dialogue of the film, as you say, it will have hit a note of consciousness within the cinema going public at the time. So I think it does do a lot of heavy lifting, despite the fact that on the surface it's like a 70-minute, kind of schlocky horror film, as it were. Yeah. I think one of the things that sticks out for me in the film is, and I can bring every film round to this if I want to, is the German expressionist influence in this film, which I think is really obvious. It shows up in sets and the lighting as well. How did you think that sort of added to this notion of light and shadow, which is literally one of the themes of the film as well? Like, how do you feel that added to your viewing experience? We've got this old tower sort of crackling in a lightning storm, the staircase, all that sort of thing. How did that influence your watching?
Oh, it works so well, let's face it. They've taken these elements from German cinema at the time and said, one, we can do this and it hides an awful lot of flaws, because that's where
that's where the whole technique came from.
Yeah. And obviously they took it and ran with it with film noir as well, because it meant you'd have sort of minimal sets and you just didn't, it was very easy to cover up things that were cheap in these type of films. So yeah, that was a major concern for them, because as with now, it's all about the money. When it comes down to it, they wanted it, and they obviously made an awful lot of money with Frankenstein as well. But it really sets the tone. It gives you the impression that this is something quite unworldly as well. You don't know what's in the shadows, and shadows normally there's nothing good that comes out of the shadows, let's face it. So it works particularly well, and it's a very good choice, I think, sort of stylistically. It gives them an awful lot of scope as well, and it's one of these techniques that's been used time and time again, especially in horror films. It really works very well. Are you of the same opinion?
I'm a big fan. I just think that it starts with this sort of kind of slow pan up the tower. You've got the thunder echoing around the stone walls, and then you've got, as I say, like these shadows that are being cast by the lightning as it sort of pierces through the small sort of gaps in the lab. I just think it's so well done. As you say, it creates this sort of otherworldliness, and whereas Dracula feels like maybe a romantic fairy tale, this feels like a nightmare because of the way the shadow is used. As you say, there's whole corners of it that are just in complete darkness. And in particular, when you have like Colin Clive maybe like leaning over the bed, there's shadow cast across his face, which not only makes him look like a matinee idol because it gives him some cheekbones, but it casts this huge like stripe across his face, which is all about the character's internal conflict and what he's going through and his ambition to bring life back. And I think it works really well here. And I think in particular, the lab has become this sort of, and I keep saying the word iconic, but it has become this sort of, it's really well associated with this particular genre of films, this kind of science fiction notion of lots of, different coloured liquids bubbling away and levers and buttons. And as an audience, we're not sure what any of this is for. And that kind of adds to the scariness of it as well. What do you think about, because the lab is such a big part of this, as set design goes, what do you think makes this so compelling and makes it just such an iconic part of this film?
It's the newness of it. It's the fact that we don't know, like you say, what these do. Why is there an arc of electricity going up between two wires? What possible use is that in this process, and various lights and everything? Yes, and the fact that in order to get the creature the necessary power it needs, it has to be hoisted up. On the bed,
heaven bound.
Yes, aye, like hands raised, or this kind of thing, hands raised to heaven kind of idea. So yes, I particularly liked all that, the fact that it's something that you just don't know. It's something mad scientist about the whole thing. And what really surprised me was none of this is in the source. It's not discussed. It's just the monster or the creature is created within a dorm room, and the process is never discussed in the book. It just kind of happens. So they had to make all this up. They had to say, well, how would you do this? what would be involved? Would it be chemical? Would it be electrical? Now, what they've done there is they've just kind of thrown everything at it. They've just designed this and said, right, so we're going to need an awful lot of electricity. We're going to need all these chemicals. We're going to need medical techniques, bits of body, that kind of thing. So yeah, we just put it all together. We put a lot of dramatic music behind it, and we just got on with it. And like I say, there's lots of like flashes of lights, whether it's coming from lightning, whether it's coming from the equipment, and it just all works together because you think that something unworldly is happening within that room. And it's tremendous the way they did it. And I was really surprised because it only lasts a couple of minutes. It's not very long at all. And they never revisit it because they don't need to revisit it. Whereas if you had sort of modern films, then they would do that sequence at least twice.
Yeah.
In a lot of these films because of the drama involved in it and all that sort of stuff. And it was all concentrated on the creation of the monster. Whereas if you look at the Kenneth Branagh one, in order for the monster to be created, he had to take his shirt off during the process.
I know.
So
I know. Weird that, isn't it? It's weird.
Yeah, there was, okay, maybe sweat played a part on it. I don't know, but so it was far more straightforward, and it's kind of the genesis of the way that this is actually done now and has been done so many times. But yes, it was really engaging. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think it balances, like it looks clinical, but it also looks like really scientific. And I'm not a sciencey brain person, so literally you could transpose that action into 2025, and I still wouldn't know what all the buttons did and what all the levers did. As you say, it's this unworldly thing. Like, why is there big tubes of light? Why does he have to go up in order to? But you just kind of go along with it because you just Frankenstein is the expert here, and he thinks he's cracked it, so we just go along with it. But I think it's one of those fantastic pieces of cinema that, as you say, like they've built it from nothing. They've built it purely from imagination, and that always feels more sort of exciting and engaging in itself. Now, you mentioned a little bit of music there. The film has no musical score apart from the opening credits because, as you and I both learned at that beautiful screening of The Bride of Frankenstein, it was the first horror film to have a full score. Mm-hmm. Do you think that makes the film more unsettling then, because there's sort of more periods of just dialogue with nothing sort of rumbling away in the background, apart from maybe the odd science experiment? It's a very dialogue-driven film.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a disconcerting viewing experience because we're so used to having music in the background. We're programmed to look for this extra element that comes in, whether it's music or whether it's a soundscape as well. Now, with this, you occasionally get, like I've mentioned before, townspeople. You get all the stuff that's going on in the lab and all that. But like I say, for the majority of it, you don't get that. It's just purely dialogue. It's partly down to the technology that was available to them at the time, because you don't want any muffled dialogue with other stuff going on around it if you can help it. But yes, it focuses your attention on the dialogue more than anything else. And like we have said a few times before, it understands that the audience is actually quite intelligent here. They can understand things. They don't need a cue in order to feel sad or feel happy or unsettled or whatever. The best films, even up to now, do that to a certain extent. They leave it up to the audience. They leave things up to an interpretation rather than hammering it home. Now, a lot of it was done through necessity, but yeah, I think it works really well, and it very much fits in with the time, the films of the time. So a lot of them were doing that sort of thing. So yes, I do think it works, and if you understand it in that way, that it's just how it was done then you will enjoy it a lot more than saying, "Oh, this is rubbish. There's not any music in it."
Yeah, and I think you quite rightly pointed out there, the soundscape is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here as well. There's, as I say, particularly in the lab scenes, but also when we have the hunting parties, when we have the villagers celebrating, when for some reason they're looking around the house for the monster and they decide to root around the basement even though the screams are coming from upstairs. There's lots going on. There's lots of like clatters and bangs and stuff throughout that I think signpost exactly what's going on, but as you say, not in a way that treats the audience as if they're stupid. Again, a bit like Dracula, I believe there will have been an assumption that a lot of the audience may have read the original novel as well. So
yes. of course.
There's that element to it as well. I think when we talk about this film, it has definitely become one of the more definitive Universal monsters in popular culture, just through the way he looks alone. Why do you think that is? And why do you think that Karloff's version of the creature has influenced so many different characters throughout film and TV and literature, like from basically 1931 onwards?
Well, one is because it hadn't been done to that same extent before then. It was very new. There was an awful lot of invention and some very, very clever people involved in it. And once you do that, and once you have the impact that this film and Dracula had, then it's very difficult for other people to come in and do their own thing, to do something that's equally as good and can sort of capture the imagination of the public in the same way. These films are iconic for a reason, and it's because of the invention and the time and the care that was put into them. There was people who really cared about what they were doing. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen now, but they're now dealing with more than a century of the moving image to take their influence from, whereas the people who were involved in this would have been involved in stage work. They would have been involved just primarily in plays more than anything else. And they had to use just that information that they had from that rather than the breadth of information that people have now. And I'm not saying that it makes people lazy or anything, but it's easier to fall back on established sort of norms with the likes of the monster here and the portrayal of Dracula. They were copyrighted for a reason, let's face it. They understood the importance of it and the potential for these as well. So yes, I think that's more to do with it than anything else.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think as well, as you say, it was the first, and there's always this notion of like original and best. And so when you've done something so successfully as Karloff and Pierce have done here in the creation of this creature, I think it's really hard to get away from the notion that, oh, well, that was really good, so maybe we should do something similar, which happens throughout, film and television, not just in terms of the look of characters, but in the way that kind of plot arcs go, certain types of character stereotypes. All of that has been repeated, as you say, through nearly a century of the moving image. My own particular favourite is I used to watch the Munsters religiously, and obviously Herman Munster very much gets his look from Boris Karloff's Frankenstein, and he is a good monster as well, which takes, again, sort of harks back to this character. I wondered what other modern horror tropes you thought could be traced back to this film, because for me the big one is the mad scientist for sure, and the sort of crazy lab assistant that goes along with it. But I wondered if there was anything else that I'd missed that you thought, oh, loads of films use this particular trope.
Well, there was the one that we mentioned right at the very start, the fact that the creature isn't introduced until halfway through the film. So it's the suspense element, it's the build-up, which you've seen so many times after that. You see it in Jaws. You don't see Bruce until about 40 minutes into the film. With the likes of Alien, you don't see the creature in Alien until well after all of the sort of ground rules in the world building has been established there as well. So that very much is a drama for the first half and a horror for the second half. So, and it's done time and time again. It's all about the pacing of films. It's all about the build-up and the anticipation. And the fact that, and a lot of it's got to do with sort of the pre-publicity as well. Like you say, in this film, the pre-publicity is a guy opening a curtain saying, basically, you're going to get the shit scared out of you here, and it's not our fault. We're telling you. You get this, and you get this through modern trailers as well. The good ones that give you something to look at, but they don't tell you what it actually is, and they keep you in suspense about it, and then they don't introduce that element into the film, like weapons, for instance. A lot of it you don't see until, again, maybe about halfway through the film. There's things going on and it's not quite done. So it's done time and time again, the same sort of technique, more than like the sort of creature design and things like that. That's slightly different, but it's the way that these films are actually put together, because when it comes down to it, people want to be scared. People want to have a fright in a situation that's controlled, an environment that's controlled, so it's not real life being scared by somebody coming at you with a knife. It's somebody on the screen coming at you with a knife. It's a slight difference, but it's enough to scare you as well. It sort of digs sort of deep into your sort of primal being more than anything else. I think that really is sort of what I would take from it in terms of what modern films are like rather than not.
Yeah, and I also, now that you said that, do you know, just about the introduction from the curtain, that's Lynchian before David Lynch was a thing. Like, he does that in Twin Peaks as well. So it's quite funny how you look back on this and you're like, oh my God, it's not just the look, as you say, of the character. It's all these little touches that horror in particular has learned and evolved from. Like, don't show everything straight away because you want people to be scared, and as you've quite rightly said, like the Hitchcock thing about the advertising, he had the big billboards out that said you don't want to be late for Psycho, all this sort of thing, like really getting people like, oh my God, well, what happens in the first 5 minutes or so, all this sort of thing, just to basically sell tickets, etc. But yeah, there's so much more to it than just the flat top and the bolts in the neck, which I think is, quite a critical part of looking back on these films, as well as recognizing that, yes, some of the looks and the dialogue, etc., might seem a bit old-fashioned now, but it's the influence that these films have had, throughout the century since. So is there anything else you'd like to add about James Whale's film before we move on?
Well, I was reading up on his relationship with the people within the film as well, James Whale, I should say, and especially Colin Clive and Boris Karloff. It came across as him being a wee bit jealous of especially Karloff, and he made him carry Colin Clive up the hill to the windmill quite a few times, which basically fucked up Karloff's back for the rest of his life. You think, well, that's a bit extreme there, but yes, not great, shall we say. So yes,
no love lost on that particular set. No, I think that for me, just to go back to this notion of vulnerability, I'm always surprised by how teary I get watching this particular character, because yes, it is a horror film, but I just feel so much for this character. Like when he whimpers, or when you know that he's scared, because Fritz in particular seems to enjoy torturing him with fire, which he's obviously very, very frightened of. I really want to throw my arms around him. And I guess that's maybe not what they were going for at the time. They wanted you to be really scared of this fearsome monster. But I don't see a monster. I just see this vulnerable person who, let's be honest, was brought here against his will, which
exactly,
is how a lot of us feel at times. So, moving on then to Lisa Frankenstein. So this is directed by Zelda Williams, who is the daughter of Robin Williams and has directed a lot of television up until this point, and was written by Diablo Cody of Juno, Young Adult and Tully fame. The film takes a completely different approach to the creation of new life, perhaps most notably that we have a young woman here acting as creator, and that we are transported to 1989. So given that's the year I was born, this is obviously the second best thing that happened in 1989. It was nominated at the Fangoria Chainsaw Awards in 2024 for Best Lead Performance for Catherine Newton for her role as Lisa, and co-stars the likes of Cole Sprouse, Liza Soberano, Jenna Davis and Carla Gugino. So, going into this film, did you know anything about it?
I did not, because when we decided to do these Universal Monsters films, and we decided that we're going to pair them up with something else, with another film within the same sort of wheelhouse. So we're looking for another Frankenstein film and trying to get one that was as new as possible. So it's the oldest and the newest we were kind of going for here. So I basically stumbled across this one because obviously we had to discount the Del Toro version because we've already done that. We've talked that to death and beyond. So sorry, my apologies. No, I'm not sorry at all, because if you can do puns, if you can do fangs puns, and you can do And you can do Frankenstein. You did a Fangs pun at the very end of the Dracula one, and you did a Frankenstein one right at the very start here.
So proud of myself.
Totally throwing me off my game by doing it so early on. So yes, I was searching for a film that was in the same ballpark, and the one sort of most noticeable one before the Del Toro was this one. It was like 2024 it was out, so that's basically why I chose it. I knew nothing about it, absolutely zero, which is kind of a good way to go into a film that you're going to review, because then you don't really have any sort of preconceived ideas. But I knew zilch about it. Did you know anything?
I'm the same. I saw the poster, which I thought looked cool, like the turquoise and pink neon. The one thing that I noticed is they're both Universal Pictures, but obviously a very different logo at the start of each film. But I knew absolutely nothing about it, so I was quite excited to dive into it. I like a coming-of-age film. I love the 80s. Yeah, I love 80s music, all that sort of thing. So I felt like this was going to be something that I would enjoy, but I'd never actually heard of it, unfortunately, up until we started talking about it. So let's dive in. The film gives us a sort of Tim Burton-esque title sequence that feels quite quirky and spooky. It's all black and white before the film itself bursts into full colour. How did you think that compared to the introduction of the original Frankenstein, which basically warned you're going to be scared?
Yeah, this makes it look as if it's going to be a romantic comedy more than anything else. If you didn't actually see the title and see the word Frankenstein, you would be kind of saying, well, is this just sort of a teen romance comedy here? So yes, it kind of throws you off completely from the very start in that sort of respect, if you didn't know what it was about. Yeah, it's very unusual.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was something a bit different as well. I do really like when films do title credits. I don't know why. I just find it's something like I quite enjoy that whole sequence, because I feel like that's you sort of like psyching yourself up for what you're about to watch. So I did actually really enjoy that. So at the heart of it all, we obviously have Lisa, who is played by Catherine Newton. What did you think of her character, and what did you think of her performance overall?
I struggled here with the character and her performance here, especially in the first half of the film, because she was doing this sort of out of place, a wee bit ditzy, but not the same sort of ditzy as all the other sort of lead female characters in this film. And I struggled to actually get on board with what she was trying to do. Now, I've seen her in other stuff as well as this, and she's a very good actor. But she came across here, I thought she came across really poorly. And I think part of that was down to the writing more than what she was actually doing on screen. I don't think she had really been given enough direction in order to do, to give the part any sort of substance. I did kind of struggle, I'm afraid, with this one.
Oh, interesting. I had a blast with this film, and I really enjoyed her performance. Like, I really liked all of the one-liners, like the scene in the car before they go to the party, and she's like, I prefer something more cerebral, and her sister goes in a wheelchair.
Yeah, I did.
So I really liked the fact. Yeah, I thought that was quite funny. I think she's kind of like, she's meant to be obviously this sort of like classic teenage sort of klutz. There's a lot of awkwardness, there's a lot of chaos around her character, but I also thought that she was quite strong in herself. Like, very early on in this film, she is sexually assaulted by her lab partner Doug, but she is able to recognize what's going on and take herself out of that situation, and she's quite strong in her response to that. So I actually thought, oh, this is going to be quite different, because she's obviously got a little bit something about her. She's not just the token dweeb that's trying really desperately to fit in. So I actually quite liked her characterization. I appreciate that it's probably a little bit two-dimensional, because it is a sort of teen drama, and that does tend to rely a little bit more on these stereotypes. But I thought that she was really enjoyable to watch, especially as the film progresses and she has a bit of a transformation into, in inverted commas, like cool girl, looking a little bit more sort of Winona Ryder, but with a perm, sort of as the film progresses. So I actually really liked her characterization as well. And I think it's one of these things where it's kind of hard to be funny, I guess, in a film like this, because it is essentially a Frankenstein movie. But I thought that she carried the humour off really well as well throughout. So I've obviously mentioned it as a Frankenstein film. We have Cole Sprouse. His character To give some context, Lisa does wax etchings on graves, and she leaves like gifts on graves in her local cemetery. And there's a big storm. It's a green and purple and blue storm because it's the 80s, and she accidentally sort of brings this young man back to life, played by Cole Sprouse. Again, he's silent for the vast majority of this film. So what did you think of his sort of interpretation of the creature, I guess, if you want to call it that?
It got better as the film went on. I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record here, but at the beginning, I know it was done for comedic effect when he was in the house with her and he was covered in sort of, as you'd be covered in slime and goo and all sorts of stuff because you've been in the ground for 150 years, I think it is. But I know it was meant to be funny, and I know it was meant to have a certain sort of slapstick element to it, but I just thought, it's just so dull. And I'd read up on the fact that Cole Sprouse had spent months with a movement coach in order to try and perfect the way he was working. You know, he was actually putting his performance across. And I thought, he's not really taking, he's not taking very much from this. I didn't think it was very good to begin with, but once he actually took on a more sort of human aspect to it, it was much better then. It was sort of, it reminded me of sort of Lord Byron type of character with the shirts and the hair and everything, and the way that he would stand very upright and all that. And obviously, like I say, not speaking and everything. But yeah, I did struggle to begin with it. Even just down to like stupid things like he knew how to operate a shower, even though he'd been dead for 150 years. And did they have showers in the 1830s? I don't know if they did.
I will completely
himself up.
Yeah, I will completely agree with you on that. The more that character developed, the more I enjoyed his performance. But you're right, at first it just felt like completely disorganized chaos. I cannot believe you worked with a movement coach. Sorry, that's really set me off, because there's nothing about that would suggest that he had spent months perfecting that. But yeah, as he becomes more lifelike and you sort of watch their pairing together, I think their chemistry develops and gets a lot stronger as well. And I think that really helps his character as well. The fact that her performance is so good, I think, is what allows his character to kind of develop as well. Now, a bit similar to the original Frankenstein, we have a relatively small but effective supporting cast here. What did you think of Carla Gugino, Liza Soberano and Joe Crest, and how did they sort of contribute to the film's rhythm, I guess?
It was very good casting, I thought. Carla Gugino is excellent. She has been in a number of things that she is just absolutely spot on, especially was it the Fall of the House of Usher, the Netflix series. She was brilliant, and that's such a good performance. And she's done a few things in that sort of vein. She's done a fair amount of horror stuff and everything as well, but she comes across as this sort of Midwestern mom, and it's very, very 80s because she's wearing the spandex outfits and listening to self-help tapes on the Walkman and all this kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, she has a margarita.
Yeah. And of course, her husband was featured reasonably heavily in Stranger Things as well. So he has that sort of 80s connection, and he comes across really well as well. You know, this sort of the dad. It's a sort of typical dad performance in that he's just kind of like almost like reading the paper all the time and just going, yes, dear. Yeah, and just not really interested in what's going on. So yeah, I did like that, and that fitted quite nicely in with these sort of American teen comedies that were actually made in the 80s, the sort of John Hughes style films at the time. So they came across very well as adults in that respect. So yeah, I did like that aspect of it. And I would have liked to have seen more of Carla Gugino. Obviously, circumstances and plot reasons meant that wouldn't actually happen. But yeah, I thought that was really good because she was this really sort of over-the-top character who was forgiven for every single thing. She would attack Lisa all the time. She would verbally attack her. And everybody else would just say, oh, that's not very nice. They wouldn't actually stand up against her or anything like that because she was like kind of the queen bee, the one in charge and all that. So yeah, that was very good. I thought that was very funny.
Yeah, I thought she was brilliant. I mean, they're basically living in what looks like a Barbie dream house. It's all pink and swirls and flowers and stuff like that. And I particularly loved when they were talking about Lisa's stepsister, who had done really well in her cheerleading practice. And she says, all those hours screaming with your legs spread against the wall have really paid off. But she delivers it with like a perfectly straight face, and you're so right, she's like that classic Midwestern mom where it's like the diamond earrings and like you can just, she's got her nails painted pink, she's cutting about in the spandex. But I thought her performance in particular was so good in this, and you're right, I would wanted to have seen more, but obviously circumstances prevented that. So one thing I did notice about this film is that obviously the creature's look sort of evolves throughout the film. Like he doesn't stay, like when he first arrives, he looks like something out of a thriller, thriller video. Like he's that kind of like grimy sort of monster look at me. And then as you see, he takes on this kind of Byron look. Do you think there was a conscious decision not to have anything that remotely resembled the original Frankenstein? And how do you think that sort of worked with the film?
Yeah, there were a few nods to the original Frankenstein in that the way that the creature was reanimated, which you didn't see on screen, I'm assuming for budget reasons more than anything else, and the fact that he was missing a hand to begin with as well. So there was a set, you would obviously see it later on when he acquired the hand and it was stitched on and everything. So there were a few wee nods to that, but it was more nods to the period when he was born, the 1830s period, more than anything else, which may have been closer to the book than closer to the film, because then you've got this creature who is actually very good looking. I mean, he's not he's kind of easy in the eye, isn't he? You know, he's
a Disney Channel star, so he's
I mean, I've been watching him in performances since the early 2000s because he was in Friends.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's right.
And then obviously it was The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, which was just at that sort of nice point where my daughter was watching all the Disney Channel stuff and it was on all the time. So it's him and his brother. So yes, it's interesting to see how he's evolved into becoming a sort of an adult actor, which is not the easiest of things to do. Let's face it, there's a lot of casualties along the way. But yes, they definitely steered away from the whole Frankenstein's monster thing. And to be honest, if they called this anything else, they could have got away with having basically no link to Frankenstein at all. I think it was more for convenience and name recognition that they actually involved Frankenstein rather than anything else. I think, yeah, they were miles away from anything we've seen in terms of the creation of creatures before.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the film obviously goes for a tone that's more playful, and that is definitely reflected in things like makeup, costume. Even the gore is not overly sort of like violent or anything like that. We have moments where, I mean, did I think that I was going to see a penis getting chopped off to On the Wings of Love at any point in my cinema reviewing career? No, I didn't. But even that is done in a way that's quite funny. It's not as serious, obviously, as the original film, and I think that's the general sort of gist of the tone. I think you're right. I think they've gone for name recognition as opposed to something that's like thoroughly related to the original script. I mean, I guess there are minor horror elements in the film. Obviously, there's a wicked stepmother, if you want to call it. That's more fairy tale than horror. But I think there is an attempt made to sort of explore this notion of like teenage insecurity and desire and rebellion. Do you think it did all those things successfully, or was it more of a sort of fluffy kind of piece of cinema for you?
Well, it did have something to say, because the stepsister in this is nice all the way through the film. It's not a typical rivalry between two girls who are of similar age and obviously go to school together. And Lisa does make a point of noting that her stepsister is really nice to her at all times. She includes her, she introduces her to friends, she takes her to parties, she stands up for her, she looks after her, which is not what you normally get from a sort of stepsister role. And even at the point where there's a wee bit of a betrayal, she doesn't give up on her, don't give up on each other. Lisa still looks after her sister in that way, because of basically the love between them and the fact that she was accepted into like a whole new family without too many problems. So yeah, that was very, very unusual, and I liked that, and I liked that portrayal. And even though she was described in a way as being just a sort of bland cheerleader type, she wasn't really. She was far more rounded than she was given credit for, because of the way that she had a certain amount of emotional intelligence, and she knew that person coming in from outside would be felt, they would feel like an outsider at all times. They just wouldn't know what's going on. They'd feel really awkward. And obviously that it takes a certain type of person to make that happen. So I thought that was really nice that was done. It didn't really sort of follow. It could have been very easy to do that, and just to have that as another sort of thriller, sort of drama element to the film. And they shied away from that, which to their credit really worked. And I felt that was a very, very good performance. I felt it was a more rounded, better performance than the performance of Lisa Frankenstein, to be honest.
Interesting. I do think this film sort of touches on this notion that you can sort of like build the perfect partner, which I think is very like teen-ish. Like, I would love it, when you were younger and you're like, oh, I'd love it to have so-and-so's hair or so-and-so's eyes, or, like building your dream man type of thing. So I think it kind of plays into that notion of sort of teenage rebellion or whatever. But you're right, I think it steers away, apart from, as I say, this kind of wicked stepmother thing, I think it steers away from a lot of the tropes that it could have sort of leaned into as well. I think it also very much leans into camp over realism. As I say, the tagline for this is a coming of rage drama. What did you think of that element of it?
Yeah, it felt a little bit forced. You're kind of steering your audience down the path of saying, well, this is what's really going to happen here, and so there are no real surprises in it. You know that Lisa is going to go from this mild and timid person into some sort of a force to be reckoned with, and a lot of that's done through the way she transforms in terms of what she's wearing and her attitude towards people around her, even though all the people around her are actually all right for the most part. Obviously, there's the creepy lab partner, and there's the girlfriend of the guy that she's obsessing about. But apart from that, everybody else is kind of really nice. So she's not really got that many people to rage against, to be perfectly honest. There's nothing like authority figures and all that she's raging against.
Yeah, and I think that like even obviously there is obviously a few jokes about like the fact that her mum was murdered, and even that flashback is supposed to be quite horrific, but they end up kind of making a bit of a joke out of it. Like, at one point her sister says to her, like, you don't have anything to worry about because your mum's already been murdered. Like, it's just sort of, it's kind of a throwaway thing. I did like the sort of camp elements of it, but you're right. I felt like there wasn't really much for her to rail against. And I will say that about an hour into this film, it's about an hour and 45 minutes long. About an hour into this film, I felt like it did kind of run out of steam a little bit, because it felt like she was becoming really angry and really vicious, and I didn't understand why. Because as you say, like the people around her, give or take one or two, are actually quite nice to her and quite understanding of her circumstances. And, she's just a little bit of an outsider at school, but nothing in a way like she's not being really badly bullied or anything like that. So I did feel that the film sort of ran out of steam because it became a sort of revenge drama that I didn't really feel fitted the tone otherwise. Like, I liked the fact that it was like quite camp and quite over the top, and I loved all the 80s costuming and colour. But pacing wise, I felt like this wasn't, and narratively, I didn't feel like it worked for me ultimately in the end. Did you feel the same about the pacing? I know obviously you kind of struggled with the characterization. What did you think of the actual like pacing and the writing driving the film forward?
There was a certain irony, wasn't there, that in the first half of the film, I thought it wasn't particularly good. It got better in the second half of the film, but at the same time, it kind of fell off a cliff in terms of the way that the story kind of ran out of steam. I felt the second half was better written than the first half, but the damage had kind of been done by that point, and the way things were sort of tidied up towards the end of it felt pretty unsatisfactory. I mean, the elements where she was in bed with the creature and things like that, and the fact that she worked out that he didn't have anything to play with downstairs.
Yes,
that kind of thing. And
but they never explained that either. Why did he have no hand, no ear, and no penis?
Yeah, exactly. Didn't understand it, because he was a bachelor and everything, because it was a bachelor's cemetery. It was yeah. There was so many things about this film that was unexplained. I was hoping to find out who murdered Lisa's mother. I thought maybe that would happen. I thought, because it was built up in such a way, oh, they were a masked intruder and they killed her, and it seemed to be quite a personal attack and all that. Well, what was that all about? Was that the father? Was that?
I thought.
And then nothing, radio silence. You just don't hear about it again. And for all of the murdering and the killing, there was no real consequences towards the end of it. Things were just sort of tied up, very nicely. Yeah, that's just the way it is. That's kind of a thing. And I just like, nah, it did nothing for me by the end of the film. And it made, obviously, the police look really stupid and all that is again and everything. And anybody in authority looked a bit daft, which is a trope of an 80s US teen comedy. But, I thought it was a wee bit lazy in the way that they did that. They could have done so much more, but yeah, it felt very unsatisfactory by the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had the opposite thing to you. I thought the first hour was really good fun, thought I was really going to enjoy it, and then struggled with the last bit. I will say that I appreciated the nods to the original Frankenstein with the spark, electrical spark rather, out of the sunbed, which was called the Kiss of Life sun tanner. And I like the little nod to the Bride of Frankenstein as well, through some costuming decisions that we see at the end of the film. But yeah, I felt like it really ran out of steam for me as well. And I also think they didn't really offer up much of a sort of critique on Lisa, whereas the Frankenstein films definitely criticise the creator rather than the creature. Whereas in this film, I felt like we saw Lisa sort of treat the creature as like a bit of a therapist. She would just sort of speak to him, obviously, about all of her problems. She then obviously decides to have sex with him because she wants to lose her virginity, and she sort of uses him to go into her villain era, as the kids would say. But you've got again, it kind of furthers this sense that the creature has no agency in everything that she's doing. She just sort of uses him to get what she wants out of school or friendship groups, whatever. Do you feel like it was a bit aimless on this front? Like, it wasn't really celebrating what she'd done with him, but it wasn't really critiquing her either.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the first instance, she had nothing to do with his creation. So she wasn't really the creator. She just happened to be somebody who hung about graveyards, putting rosary beads on gravestones, really. So yeah, there was that was very sort of contentious to begin with, but obviously it established a connection between the creature and Lisa. And the fact is that she was just using the creature, which actually does fit in quite nicely with some of the interpretations of the Frankenstein story we've seen. It's this romantic notion, in all cases, and I use romantic in sort of very broad sense, that you're able to create life. And once you create life, you actually really don't know what to do with it. And we saw that in the original film, and we saw that in the Del Toro film as well. The first thing that they do is they shun them. They say, oh, what do you think about what I'm going to do here? But I've got no idea. I've kind of achieved my aim, but my aim is standing in front of me, basically grunting at me. So what do I do now? The whole first interaction between the two of them, when the creature turns up at the house, and I know it was meant to be slapstick comedy and her falling off the roof and all this kind of thing, but it did feel very forced as well. And then almost immediately, after she fell on top of him off the roof, suddenly they were best of pals, and she was sneaking him into her bedroom and all this kind of thing. And it was like, again, there's no flow, there's no more. It just needed one more quick scene where she kind of went, okay, so I've been involved in the creation of you, so therefore I need to look after you. But it just was like, oh no, come into my room, you can stay in the closet, and then we can have this nice funny scene where you try on all these different clothes, including a few dresses and things like that. And it's like, it didn't sit very well with me at all. It really didn't. But
yeah. Do you think the film needed to be set in the 1980s? Was there anything specific about that time that you felt added to the drama or the comedy, or do you think it could have been set sort of at any time? Do you think it was trying to be nostalgic for something that given that the audience that it's aimed at don't have the nostalgia for the 80s, like, why do you think they chose that particular time setting?
I think it very much played off of the fact that the 80s are slightly in vogue again with the likes of Stranger Things. It's very much taking a horror element and a nostalgia element and putting them all together. And it looks back to a time where things were better and simpler, and you didn't have kids on the phones all the time. This perception that people are not engaging or interested in things like that. So I think that was probably the main reason of setting it there. And a lot of the 80s was very neon and bright coloured and everything like that. So, and there was all these sort of different factions of people like jocks and goths and all this stuff. Although I objected to the goth thing because it was 1989 and that pretty much died out by that point. It was very, very niche by that point. It was sort of early 80s that was there. But yeah, so it did take its cue very much from Stranger Things in the styling, in the time period, and in the music as well. They had like sort of lots of wee needle drops of stuff. That, like I said, there was a couple of comedic ones that was introduced as well, but it was very much, this is what the kids would listen to. There was an Echo and the Bunnymen song in there was a Pixies song, and then you'd counter that with an REO Speedwagon song as well. So, but yes, it was very deliberate. They chose somewhere it had a hook and it had something identifiable about it, rather than if it's set in modern day, it's just going to be all different stylings and everything, and the look of the areas are going to be different as well, so it's not going to be quite the same. This is more almost like a statement piece.
Yeah, and as I say, I'm a sucker for all things 80s, so I love the colour palette, the outrageous eyeshadow, everything that sort of goes along with that. You mentioned, obviously, soundtrack there, and there were quite a few needle drop moments in it. Did you think that worked in terms of, like, the film was obviously trying to do a little bit of sort of, like, dark humour and romance and horror and everything else that's going on? Do you feel like the soundtrack actually contributed to the sort of overall, like, experience of watching it?
I think it felt a wee bit forced, to be honest, especially with the needle drops, because they were kind of on the button. Like I mentioned, the Echo and the Bunnymen song they used was a song called Lips Like Sugar, and they had that playing when she was walking down the corridor, and it was sort of close in on her, and obviously she applied all the very red lipstick and everything. I thought, well, that's a wee bit on the nose. The music over the title sequence was very strange because it was strings and romantic and everything, and I thought, what are they doing here? What is this? It didn't seem to fit in with anything else that came after it, because the music that came after it was very much in a sort of an 80s style as well. That kind of dramatic music, it was more sort of synthy rather than sort of full orchestra and things like that. And it worked to a certain extent. Yes, it sat quite nicely in the background and it wasn't intrusive or anything. But yeah, the needle drops and the music at the start really didn't work for me at all.
Yeah, I must admit, I felt that the I Can't Fight This Feeling Anymore sequence on the piano went on for far too long for me. I was like, okay, we get it. Stop singing now. But as I say, I did really love the use of On the Wings of Love. I have not got that song out of my head since I've watched it. And I just thought it was a really funny use of that song, given what was going on screen.
Yeah. That was good, yeah.
I thought it would have been a bit more sort of like synthy and a bit more kind of edgy, but you're right, it does start off with kind of strings, which fits into this notion that he's this sort of like Byron-esque character, but then again, it doesn't really go anywhere. It's a bit like the Dead Mum plot device. It doesn't actually get used again the rest of the film. When I was watching this, as I say, as much as I had fun with the first hour or so of it, I struggled to see where it sort of fitted within the Monsters universe, if you want to call it that. Do you think that it does belong in the sort of pantheon of these types of films, or do you think it's just something that's borrowing from the universe but doesn't necessarily deserve to be part of it?
I think it's very much door number 2 on that one. It doesn't deserve to be part of anything to do with the sort of the Monsters universe. It's borrowed the name and some of the mythology around the Frankenstein story. It doesn't really... It's not interested in taking any more of it. It's really just using that as partly just a small device in a film that's more interested in the fact that it's close to a John Hughes 80s comedy film. So it really doesn't sit there at all. It's very much an outlier as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I thought this was going to be maybe a slightly different type of film than what it was, and I was like, oh, okay, a female creator, that's something a bit different. Let's see how this goes. And like I said, I did have a blast with the first hour or so of it, and then I really started to struggle with where the film was going sort of thematically and the different sort of character development that was or wasn't happening. So I don't really think it does belong in that sort of pantheon. I think it's definitely an attempt at an homage to the original, as I say, and there's little nods to like The Bride in there as well, but I definitely don't think it's one that sort of belongs within that Monsters universe specifically. And obviously we have Zelda Williams directing and Diablo Cody writing on this. Diablo Cody is quite well established in her career at this point. What did you think of Zelda Williams' directorial choices that were made throughout the film?
It was fine. It serviced the story more than anything else. It wasn't flashy in any way. It didn't do anything unusual, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because a lot of the time you're really just wanting the story to be told in a way that you can understand it. So it didn't do anything that you wouldn't really expect. Didn't do anything unusual, I didn't think. And that's, like I said, it's not a bad thing. But, you know, it could have been directed by any number of people. The fact that it was Robin Williams' daughter, great, yep. I'm glad to see that another Nepo baby's getting a break in the That's very unfair. I know that's very unfair, because people have to prove themselves whether they have the name behind them or not. But yeah, it was serviceable. It was fine. The writing, though, was not great. You know, the characters weren't developed. They were very like one-dimensional. You know, there was the girlfriend of the guy she was listening to. That was a one-dimensional performance. It just it didn't work particularly well. And I know there's a limited amount of time, but if you think about it, this film had 30 minutes more than the Frankenstein film from 1931 in order to do something, and it didn't really do it. In fact, I would say it did less in terms of character development for a lot of the cast compared to the earlier film. So yeah, I don't think that worked particularly well, and I think that's probably my main problem with it, because everything stems from the story, stems from the screenplay. You can have a beautiful looking film, but if the screenplay is not there, then yeah, it's just not going to work in the same way, and that's kind of what I felt.
Yeah, I think as you say, the direction was fine. There was nothing outrageous. It was well done. I think this feels like a film that was more about the creator than the creature. And I guess that's where I sort of struggled with where it was going then after about the hour mark, where I was like, oh, this is definitely not the film that I thought it was going to be. So it's not one that I would necessarily rush out to rewatch. Like, I had fun with it for the for the first hour, and then from there on I had my issues with it. But I think that it's definitely an interesting sort of entry into the monsters world, if you want to call it that. Is definitely more borrowing the notion of the monster as opposed to sort of thoroughly exploring it. Is there anything else you would like to add about Lisa Frankenstein?
No, not really. It was too long. It wasn't very interesting. It was a disappointment. But apart from that, brilliant, yeah.
Yeah. It could have been worse. We could have had to watch Kenneth Branagh take his shirt off and chew the scenery for that particular adaptation.
True, yes, yeah.
There's always a bright side. So so that is it from us on this Moviescramble special edition podcast. You can find us on all the usual social channels, including Instagram, Blue Sky, and now TikTok, because we're so down with the kids. We're going to start posting little teaser clips for our podcast on TikTok, if you can give us a follow there as well. You can also email us, podcasts@moviescramble.co.uk. And of course, we'd appreciate a rating from you on the listening platform of your choice. But until next time, dear listener, it is goodbye from me. Bye.
Bye.